Good morning. How are we doing today? This is James Sweeney, aka SplitSuit. Welcome back to another video. And in today's video, we're going to wrap it up with part 4 of the hand reading in 6 max series. And again, if you remember, over this entire series, we've been going through a hand range by range, street by street, action by action, and really getting a concrete range that we can work with. And of course, talking about the strategic adjustments we can make and should be making along the way. If you haven't already seen parts 1, 2, and 3, please stop right this moment and go watch those first. That way everything makes sense. Of course, with hand reading and range building, everything is very linear. It's step by step. If you don't understand preflop, it's going to be very, very difficult to understand this range here. So if you haven't seen parts 1 through 3 yet, pause this, watch those first, and then come back and we'll jump right into it. So just a quick refresher about what's happened so far in this hand. Hand 27 in the 6 max workbook. Again, we're playing 50 no limit, 6 max, so open raise to 150 by the cutoff. We 3-bet to 5, cutoff decides to call, we built that range together. We c-bet the flop, they called, we built that range together. Turn deuce, we bet, they call again, built that range together, and now we're on the river, and of course it's that nasty ace. So let's start by plugging that into Flopzilla, ace of diamonds on the river, and we'll start hacking through and building everything so it's nice and pretty for the template. If you don't already have your templates or you want to get your own for off-table study, they are totally free. Go to splitsuit.com/templates. It'll take you right to it. It is a name your own price product. Feel free to name $0 if you want it for free. No stress whatsoever. So let's jump into it and start talking about what the cutoff has here, what they would call our shove with, and then dissect whether or not this shove was actually any good. So as always, let's start with the guiding questions. So in this spot, the cutoff calls your all in on an interesting card. Consider how many ace-x combos the cutoff would get to the river with. Would the cutoff call your all in with ace-x, pocket nines, or 8x? So you notice these guiding questions, as always, are there to turn your brain on, get your brain thinking about the right things, and then make some decisions and go from there. And you notice that it's kind of chunked out into like 3 different areas. So would they fold top pair when you shove? Would they fold things that were over pairs on the turn but now are strong second pairs? And would they fold things like 8x and 6x and pocket 7s, kind of going to fit that same kind of bill? Are they going to call with things that are essentially now a kind of a second or third-ish kind of pair thought process? So, of course, given the fact that this person is a 34-13 over 109 hands, we don't have a tremendous amount of river information against them. In fact, if we remember back to the flop, they probably only faced maybe 4 or 8 c-bets. On the turn, they hadn't faced any c-bets. And of course, on the river, they're not going to have faced any river c-bets either if they didn't face any turn ones. The only real stats we have that are even slightly applicable here: win to showdown at 31%, win money at showdown at 70%, and of course, over 109 hands, not a huge thing that we can use to our advantage. They're just starting points, and honestly, not even super good ones, just simply because 109 hands, not great for showdown stats. So we're kind of flying blind here. We're going to have to make some general assumptions and go forward from there, so let's start by doing exactly that. To start, let's open up Flopzilla and get to work. So we already put in the ace of diamonds on the river, and you notice that there simply aren't very many hand categories they can have by the time they get to this point, right? They can't really have any straights based upon the ranges we assigned earlier. They really don't have any sets. You know, yeah, they have that rare partial combo of aces because we thought they wouldn't necessarily 4-bet that pre-flop. And again, if you don't really know where the heck this range is coming from, please start by watching parts 1, 2, and 3 first. And then we have some 2-pair, of course, made with ace-8 suited, so not a tremendous amount of combos of that. We're talking about some top pairs. Of course, we assume that they would float the turn with ace-high some percentage of the time, not a tremendous amount. And of course, this is also going to include the times when they have like ace-jack of hearts that, of course, decided to float flop, call turn, and then improves on the river. And then we have other stuff. So we notice that a large chunk of the range is going to be what? It's kind of like these medium-ish pairs, right? Pocket pairs below top pair, and obviously we crush that stuff. Middle pairs, we crush that stuff as well, but not a tremendous amount of combos of it at only 6. And there are weak pairs at roughly a third of their overall range when they get to the river. That's with 7s, 5s, and 3s, stuff that made sense for them to double call the flop and turn earlier. And again, given their player type, probably thought they were going to call the 3-bet with their pre-flop too. So there are kind of three different kind of players you're going to run into. And again, we're doing this because we really don't have great river or HUD stat information on the cutoff. So the way that I visualize it is there are essentially three kind of players on the river here. There are the players who are going to call ace X, fold everything else other than like 2 pair plus. There are players that are going to always call with ace X and then sometimes call with things like 9s, 10s, maybe king 8, whatever it is. And then there are players that are going to call all ace X and pretty much all of the secondary, tertiary pairs. So my thing that I have to figure out right this moment is saying, okay, which player do I think this is? Is this the kind of guy who I think is going to call 8x for sure, pocket 9s for sure, pocket 9s and 10s sometimes, or pocket 9s and 10s never, right? Because if they're the kind of person that never calls with 9s, 10s, 8x, whatever it be, then obviously we're just jamming into ace X, and all that happens is they fold the times they don't have it, and they call the times they do, and we get our butt handed to us that time that they do in fact have ace X. So you have to kind of determine at this point, what do you think this kind of person is? Call sometimes with those second best, call a ton with the second best, or call never with those second best. So what I'm going to do is share my assumption. My assumption is that this person is going to call with 8x, 9s plus. They're not going to call with 7s, 5s, 3s, any of that kind of stuff, and they're certainly never going to fold an ace. So that answers all of these guiding questions, right? Are they going to call our all-in with ace X? Yep, you betcha. 9s, I think so. 8x, yes, I think so. And again, there aren't a tremendous amount of 8x combos, so even when I'm wrong on that, it doesn't really influence the equation all that much. But I'll kind of, again, show you how I would think about this. So I'm going to tick in pocket pairs below top pairs. Again, that's that 9s through kings, which we crush. Middle pair, again, 10-8, 9-8 suited. And again, we smack that. And everything else, I think, is probably going to fold. So 7s, 5s, 3s, all the whiff flush draws, that kind of stuff. So this is my general assumption. And if we go here and we plug that in and we also look over here at the equities, we notice that our hand is doing super, super well, right? Obviously we're ahead a ton of the time, almost 2/3. This is a great situation for us. So I'm going to plug this into the template because this is my assumption, and then I'm going to kind of dissect this a little bit further. So again, Control Alt T is in Timothy. I'm going to take that. Going to paste it in the river range. We're going to go to percentage of previous range is 52%, and number of combos, hit tab, go into combo mode, 28. So one of the major things that we need to kind of keep in mind here, and just like a general takeaway, is notice how the combos changed so quickly, right? So if we go up to the top when we're looking at preflop, we were looking at an overall opening range of about 293 combos, calling the 3-bet about 210, and then after that, notice that by the time we get to the river, we're shrinking down to about 28. Definitely something that we want to be keeping in mind. Oftentimes you're going to find by the time you get to the river, unless you're talking about like situations where ranges are really wide or really aggro, oftentimes you're not dealing with like copious amounts of river combos. It's usually going to be sub 40 combos on the river. So keep that kind of stuff in mind. And again, that can change based on player type. That can change based upon single raise versus 3-bet pots. Of course, 3-bet pots are going to be a little bit different, but keep all that kind of stuff in mind. Now, the major thing that is obviously going to influence whether or not this shove was any good are these second best things, right? The pocket pairs below top pair, the middle pairs, and how that is going to influence things. Because if we go in here, and again, not only do I want to ever dissect a hand and analyze it based upon the assumptions that I made, but whenever I'm studying a hand off table, I also take the time and say, okay, well, what if my assumptions were off? And what if they were slightly off? And what if they were really off? So let's kind of do that for a moment and talk about how this hand can go from good to bad really quickly. So if we go back a tick, uncheck the river and go back here, let's make the assumption that they would call middle pairs half the time. So again, we're making that kind of like sometimes assumption here on these second best hands, and about half the time for the 9s plus. And remember, the queens and kings, those are already discounted based upon the preflop action, but we're going to go through and kind of factor it in this way. So if we do that same thing, again, keep 50% continuance, which means they call half, fold half, you notice here that all of a sudden our hand is behind against that river calling range, right? So that's not great. You may look at that and say, well, obviously this shove is awful. Well, that's actually not the case. Reason being is that notice that they're only calling about a third of the time, which means they're folding 2/3 of the time, which means 2/3 of the time you're picking up the 4750 uncontested. The other chunk of the time, yes, you're not necessarily ahead when they call you, but you are still doing plenty fine, and it's still a totally profitable play. Don't believe me? Go run the EV on it. Trust me, it'll be good. And if you don't know how to run the EV on it, I have 2 different videos. I have one on basic EV and one on advanced EV. For something like this, where you're analyzing something that has multiple outcomes, where if you shove, they call and you win, they call and you lose, or they fold, there's 3 different outcomes for that. You'd want to use the advanced EV equation. Again, there's a video on that. I'll leave a link in the description box, or I'll try to remember to for this. If not, just in YouTube, search SplitSuit advanced EV and it'll show right up. So even still against that, totally fine to make the shove. What if you made the different assumption? What if you made the assumption that that stuff never, ever calls? So when you shove and get called, you never win. So if that's the case, you notice that they're only continuing about 19% of the time. This is rounded up to 20 to make things nice and easy. So that means roughly 80% of the time they're going to fold when you shove, which means, again, you're picking up that uncontested pot. And when you shove, 20% of the time you get called, and you're going to lose the full shove worth, which is 2650, because that's the effective stack here. Again, you can run the math on that to see if this is good. So again, what I'm trying to do is highlight here how you think about this, not just the hand reading process, but also how you zoom out and look at the strategy based upon the range you're assigning, based upon the frequencies that you're assigning, and go forward from there. So one major thing that I want you to really understand here is looking at this percentage of previous range. So of course, in the situation where we think they're always going to continue with 8x or 9s plus, they're continuing about half the time, folding roughly half the time, right? Because if they're not calling, they're folding. They only have 2 options when we shove into them. So what do we do with that information? Well, the simple thing we can do is say, okay, yes, we have kings here, and we've already talked about playing kind of the value side of the spectrum, but what if we had a different hand? What if we had, say, a bricked flush draw like queen jack of hearts? What if we had pocket 3s and we're deciding, do we want to go for the bluff here and turn that hand into a bluff instead? These are the things that you can ask yourself, and once you have concrete information on frequencies, it becomes really easy to make that discernment. Because based upon this, they're calling half, folding half, based upon the original thing we said of they were always going to continue, go back to 100%, accept, go back to 100%, accept. Cool. So we go back to the original assumption that I made, which is we are getting called by those second best hands often. You notice that, again, they're continuing about half. Well, if they're folding half, that means that we can make some outright profitable bluffs very easily, right? So if we had queen jack of hearts based upon all the ranges that we have assigned so far, cool, that's actually a pretty good bluff spot. Let's take it. So this is the way that you would zoom out and look at the entire hand from a strategic point of view, based upon your opponent's ranges, based upon your opponent's frequencies. Remember, if they're ever folding more than half the time, you should be bluffing a tremendous amount of the time. And this is something that you get a feel for when you do this kind of work and study off table. But if you've never done this kind of work or study, if you don't actively do this in between sessions, and your opponents are, you're in hell. Trust me, the game is going to get very difficult. And yes, this stuff is difficult. This stuff is tricky. It's technical. It's complex. It takes time. It's not easy. Even in real time, there's going to be plus or minus 10%, maybe plus or minus 20% on some of these assumptions that you're making. But you would much rather be plus or minus 20% than plus or minus 50%. Right? You want to be closer and closer to that good, solid, true core of a range. Because once you have that, once you understand your opponent's ranges, once you understand your opponent's frequencies, you own them. 100% own them. They cannot wiggle out of it. They may beat you in some pots, but you are going to absolutely crush them in the war. And this is what you need to be doing off table, is studying, preparing for that war. And yes, this is a situation that isn't, this entire hand wasn't the most exciting hand in the world, right? 3-bet preflop with a pocket kings. Okay, cool, standard. We decide to c-bet, double barrel, and then rip it in on the river on, a board that's pretty common. So it's not the most exciting situation, it's not the most atypical situation, but these are the spots we should be looking at, the spots you play often. Because once you understand them with the hands you're typically going to use, like pocket kings, it becomes easier to say, okay, well, could I have 3-bet preflop more lightly? And then how would I handle postflop if I have that wider range of hands, right? When you can answer that question, it opens up tons of extra options and flexibility. Your whole playbook becomes yours, right? You're not capped by cards. And that's the most important thing anyone can take away from this. If you're watching this and you're like, hey, how do I open up more? How do I become a better tag? How do I start generating more of a lag strategy? How do I start increasing my aggression? Understanding the hand reading, understanding the frequencies is exactly where you need to start. So if you're serious about doing this kind of work, if you're serious about improving your hand reading skills, your range building skills, and want to do it off table so that in real time you can actually use this stuff and have an innate feel, you're definitely going to want to pick up my workbook. You can find that at splitsuit.com/6, but I do want to make you a very special offer. So with my workbook, there is a power pack version, and the power pack version is chock full of extra value that you're definitely going to want to take advantage of if you're super serious about diving into this and you really like this kind of range analysis. So part of the Power Pack is a huge series of videos. It's 10 videos from professional 6-max coaches who share their ranges and hand reading process on various hands from this book. This is the absolute closest thing to an answer key that will ever exist for the workbook and the best value you can get. Other bonuses for the Power Pack also include a lifetime license of Flopzilla, my custom Flopzilla range presets, complete tutorials for both Flopzilla and Hold EQ, which is a software that I cannot live without when doing range versus range work, and my most popular webinar to date that dives deep into hand reading and my own hand reading framework. So if you're serious about improving your hand reading skills and want to stop wasting time floundering between sessions, grab the Power Pack today and use the code SERIOUS to save $100. Save a lot, learn a lot, and start taking your 6-max win rate seriously between sessions. Just go to splitsuit.com/serious, use the code SERIOUS at checkout, and get started today. This code will only work for the first 25 players to use it, so act quickly if you want to lock in the savings. Thank you so much for checking out this series. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and hopefully you really enjoyed the step-by-step range reading, very, very technical process. I know this stuff can be a little tricky, a little complex, but trust me, when you work through it, it allows you to become a much stronger player. So hopefully you enjoyed. If you have any comments or questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you back soon with a new video, and in the meantime, good luck out there and happy grinding.